what is today's objective? So really, I'm wanting you to leave this webinar in the outset by being able to appreciate and communicate the critical conditions for building a brand in China. And that is really because the overarching theme of this is branding and digital. And then on the digital side of things, to be able to direct exporters to marketing and sales channels that are well suited for their brand and product, and also give some light advice and direction on what do you need to be thinking about to really build a comprehensive and meaningful market strategy. And that point is really what I want to emphasize above all. You are not going to, from 2 hours of just hearing me talk directly to a camera, going to become China experts yourselves. It's an incredibly complex market, as I'll go into talking about soon. But what I want that is really valuable is for you all to start thinking the right way about China. I always say that really when you should be looking at China, you should be looking at it with a bit of fearful respect. It is incredibly seductive for an exporter, but it is a very, very tough market to crack and succeed in. And I'll touch on that very shortly. But what we are going to be talking about today, probably easiest to think about this in 4 sessions, 4 blocks I've got there. For the first hour, we'll be talking about getting to grips with China. And so this really touches on that critical foundation for building a brand, for understanding why you need such a comprehensive and well thought out digital strategy. As you can see there, things about demographics, consumer mindsets. And then block 2, very brief, this area will just be a reflection on how Canada is placed in China. So that's understanding where the national brand sits, particularly in comparison to other countries of origin, what things should be mitigated, what things should be leveraged, just briefly going through the how does political tensions affect Chinese consumers, because it's definitely more pronounced than most. And then block 3 is really where we'll spend a good chunk of time today. So that's going through the digital landscape. So really giving you a bit of a first-hand look. Obviously, it's not as powerful as it would have been in person, where I'd probably be forcing you to all get out your phones and download some apps and really get some hands-on experience. But it's going through some visuals and discussion over what's an important channel, what's a least important channel, where are the critical areas that Canadian businesses should 100% be focusing, and where is a bit of a nice to have. And that's across sales and marketing. And then finally, I think we won't have too much time, but just rounding things off, a few final thoughts on, okay, well, what now? Where do you take that just, okay, I understand and I can explain a bit about China, to, all right, how do we make things happen? A discussion on a bit of a China-ready checklist that we provided in the full training module, and just explaining that and how you can kind of take an exporter from being China interested to China ready. So I think it's a really interesting time to be having this webinar, when so many markets around the world are quite beleaguered and looking like it for the foreseeable future. China is really surging ahead, and last week we had some good evidence of that. So last week was Singles Day in China. Now, for anyone who was unaware of Singles Day, although I know its marketing has stretched well beyond China now, Singles Day is, if you're a China marketer, or if you're a brand in China, Singles Day is always circled on your calendar. It is a big, well, used to be 24-hour shopping festival. It's now extended beyond that 24 hours into essentially a couple of weeks or some short time periods in the lead up to November 11th. But this year, this is Alibaba's result on the screen here. Alibaba being the big tech giant, which will go into a few of their big e-commerce platforms shortly. And that raised over $74 billion in GMV went through Alibaba platforms in their Singles Day period. Now, this proved to be a 26% growth year on year, and a huge amount of brands participated. A lot were very successful, and that just starts to give you an idea that if you're an exporter, you see, wow, these consumers are seriously confident. Yesterday McKinsey released their big global consumer survey report on sentiment, and China was, for example, half of all Chinese were very confident about their stated being very confident about their country's economic recovery and their confidence in the market, compared to, say, only 22% in America. And so you'll see that, but then you'll start to think, okay, well, over 31,000 international brands participated on this Alibaba platform for Singles Day. I'm going to get into talking about the advent of live streaming e-commerce as a really powerful marketing tool that's grown over the past couple of years. That live streaming, it was estimated that on these Alibaba platforms, there was 1,660 years worth of live streaming done in the Singles Day period. So you can imagine if you're an SME and you're trying to, be like, oh, well, there's this huge frenzy for purchasing and buying goods, and everyone gets really hyped up and they're really excited about the discounts and the promotions that they can get. I'm going to be able to stand out then. It's very difficult, and you really do need quite a comprehensive strategy if your product or your brand doesn't have inherently some huge value for a Chinese consumer. And so that's why I want to start off this webinar with a slightly negative discussion. And this comes from years and years of talking to countless delegations of brands who've visited China that I've spoken to from all around the world, and from size big to small. Our client base is very vast. We've worked in 26 different categories, this year, from aerospace to natural fruit-based laxatives to female hygiene. It's really everywhere that we work, from budgets of $100,000 to marketing budgets of 50 million a year for the big companies that we work for. So we see really across the whole spectrum. And I've labeled this the Be Realistic, the China Market Inquiry Response Script, because I often find when I'm talking to prospective exporters or SMEs who are interested in the market, they come to Shanghai, they've gone, it's all glamorous and glitzy and everyone speaks English, and it seems really easy and people are buying everything. They seem really sophisticated, so my product's going to be well aligned there. I do like to pour some cold water, because if one member of my audience walks out and goes, after hearing this, I've realized that maybe China isn't actually right for us. It's a bit too hard. It's a bit too competitive, and I'm going to look elsewhere. I will consider my job a success, as you should as well, because that several $100,000 and a couple of years of investment from this company is not wasted. It's put in a more efficient market where it might not have the gaudy sales numbers and results that China does, but it will be of value compared to just losing that investment. So running through those, firstly, you won't make money in your first 2 years. This gets down to why I'm spending a fair chunk of time today talking about how critical it is to build a brand in China, because it's very hard to acquire consumers. It can be very expensive. We're going to be talking about the likes of Tmall, the big Alibaba-owned platforms, the one that really headed a lot of that Singles Day spend that we were talking about on the previous slide. It can cost depending on your category, $150,000 to really set up your owned store on these platforms, and the kind of marketing investment to be buying SEO and search terms and keywords on these platforms to make sure that you get up the algorithm. It is fiercely competitive to try and crack into this all-powerful algorithm. And so number two, China doesn't want your products. And that really speaks again to the building of the brand. China has everything. It is the seductive market on the global marketplace. Everyone wants a piece of China. And so in some way, shape or form, products that Chinese need or want are already there. And so when I said before about if your product or brand doesn't inherently have something special, you will need to have a really intelligent strategy, which leads into that third point, which is fairly obvious. Without large budgets, you do need to be prepared to be very patient. I mentioned before, a lot of SMEs, a lot of smaller brands that we work with, they will end up having to spend a decent amount on our strategical knowledge because they need a much more intelligent way of spending their smaller budget. Yes, you can have a lot of margin for error when you have a large budget. You can spend $1 million on some big name influencer, where influencers are very powerful in China. But yet that's not the most efficient use of your spend, because you could set up a whole multi-channel strategy and grassroots influencer strategy for that kind of investment, and then do a lot more on top of that. And so that's where this knowledge, if you inherently don't have it, particularly if you're an SME and you're kind of used to having some key staff be, jack of all trades and do something in marketing, do something in operations. It's a very alien market in China. It's a foreign language. It's pretty wild outside of the top tier sophisticated cities. And you need to be aware that that's what's going to be the case, and you can't just kind of wing it in a certain few areas. It's always a funny story I like recollecting on. I work a lot with a risk management consultancy, and whereas we will often segment China, as I'm about to talk to, by different regions, different cities, where they're most appropriate for our particular client and their particular products, they will do so on where it's easiest to do business. They will say, right, these are the kind of cities which, right, China Skinny might have said, this is where your product's best suited, but we know that you're going to have to potentially bribe people. You're potentially going to have to do something that goes against your business's ethics and morals. And so that's really interesting in terms of understanding how different this market is compared to when you just visit a Shanghai and feel like everything's smooth sailing. So let's get into things. So for the next probably 30 or 40 minutes, we'll be talking about that first block of really understanding what is it that makes China tick. And so these kind of points are what I like to cover off. As Jade very appropriately introduced, China is huge and it's growing. But, and people like to go, oh yeah, I know China's big. I know there's differences in China, but really appreciating how important that is when you're building your entry strategy or your growth strategy. Secondly, who actually are the consumers? There's a lot of kind of 101 stuff, which I find talking to my clients is often quite jarring, and they have to go, oh, I didn't realize that. Thirdly, that consumers crave information in China like nowhere else. And that's a really important thing to fully understand before we get into the digital world and why you're having to be across so many touch points and have such comprehensive information as compared to your other markets. And then lastly, that traditional target market profiles do need a rethink in China. And that's definitely something which I could talk to all day. It's fascinating to me how often a client will come in with an expected target market profile, and they'll have to completely rejig that when they're looking at China. I mentioned before, it's just on top of mind as we're currently working with them, this natural fruit-based laxative brand, where in Australia their core consumer is a 60-year-old, equally male, equally female, but yet in China it's very much a 20 to 30-year-old. There's a very it's a very big beauty problem in China because of a particular cultural phenomenon around how to manage and detox your body for weight loss and skin health reasons. So there's things that pop up all the time in our work, which we're really always uncovering some really interesting information. Okay, so looking beyond just China, and I think this is a really easy example to kind of put this in perspective. So we look down the bottom there at Guangdong province. So this is best part of 110 million people live in this province. But if we just look at the size of those top 4 cities in this one province, and so you see T1, T3, T2 there. So that means tier 1 through to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. That's quite often a way that people look at cities in China. There's other ways to look in terms of city clusters in certain regions. But tiers is the easiest way, and that's across things like the size economically through to sophistication through to population. There's notably kind of 4 tier 1 cities, 15 tier 2 cities, 39 tier 3, and then it gets larger and larger until you kind of cover China's 338 cities, what are categorized as cities. And so in that one province, if you were to Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Foshan, and Dongguan, if you were to look at those 4 cities and their GDP on a list of, if they were all independent countries, they would all find themselves in the top 50 countries in the world by GDP, which goes to show how really understanding and focusing in on a particular region or a particular city can be equally valuable. You're not going to go to Thailand or Argentina with just a strategy that you've got for the whole continent. You're going to look at that very separately. Because even, you might say, oh, but Andrew, they'll speak a different language there. Well, in many cases, they speak different languages in these cities. You look at Guangzhou and Shenzhen. They are 30 minutes down the road from each other by high-speed train. Yet in Shenzhen, they speak Mandarin. In Guangzhou, they speak Cantonese. From an identity standpoint, when you're thinking about building this brand and marketing to these consumers, Shenzhen, only 30, 40 years ago, was notoriously a fishing village with just a couple 100,000 people. It's now the tech hub of China. It's seen a huge amount of migration. It's got a really young population. People are often away from their families, whereas in Guangzhou, it's much more traditional. People are still living in their multi-generational family units. And it's very different in that regard. And on the right there, channels, sophistication, traditions, things like obesity can be massively different. We're talking about a huge country with quite different resources across the country. So up north, obesity rates are far higher. And we've worked in big car manufacturing clients. We've had to factor in, well, how are you building your seats? How are you building the size and spaciousness of your vehicles? Because it does have to counter for some pretty significant changes in the makeup of what people are in China. And then things like gender. Now, I could talk forever about each one of these things and how it differs across the board, but I just thought I'd dig into one example. So gender I've chosen, just to give you an idea of really, again, thinking the right way, trying to understand, okay, this is such a huge country. It's so competitive. You do need to really intimately understand factors about your target market to try and stand out from your competitors. So we look at something like gender distribution across the country. As you can imagine, this has a huge flow-on effect to who your target market is and who how you're talking to them. So many of you will be aware of China's one-child policy, which ran throughout the last few decades, is now a two-child policy officially, given China's really struggling or plummeting birth rates is likely to be removed altogether within the not too distant future. An unfortunate with cultural issue with a preference for males was there was a large amount of female infanticide throughout that time, and has led to quite a massive gender imbalance. So around 117, 118 males for every 100 females in China. That's across the whole country. And as you can imagine, there's some quite strong imbalances. So we mentioned Guangdong before, and we look at that province here. So there's 131 based on birth numbers in 2005, which was the largest single study done across the whole country in terms of registering births and the gender distribution. Based on that, there's 131 men for every 100 female in that one province. And you look at, again, a city like Shenzhen, it's a tier 1 city. It's very attractive for a lot of foreign businesses entering China. Yet it's a tech hub. There's a very strong emphasis on men in that industry. And so, again, more and more, you look at a city like Shenzhen, and it's quite fascinating to see the increase in even beyond in certain regions, certain areas of Shenzhen, above that 131 to every 100 females. So you can imagine the flow-on effect that has to how people are living their lives, how people are thinking about their families, how they think about their future. And just to give you an idea of how intense the outcome of an issue like this gender imbalance is, earlier this year in May, China had their big annual Congress, which is normally in February, but got pushed to May for obvious reasons. And one of the key things was introducing a civil code for the first time in China's history, and partly on the back of discussion about how to address the rocketing divorce rates in China and also promoting childbirth. Given that graph I showed you in the previous slide, you can understand how there's now over 250 million single adults in China. And it's starting to become a real cultural phenomenon. So if you're a brand, you're starting to have to think about smaller packaging. Are you creating food, which is just single pack food? Are you having to think about, you're a furniture producer and what kind of furniture are you building? Thinking about the way people are living, their apartment sizes, their habits, everything. It's quite a dramatic shift for a country which is so built upon very strong traditional multi-generational family structures. And here, probably one of the hottest topics that came through this year is when the professor of economics at Fudan, which is a top Chinese university, was like, well, look, China's all about creating this harmonious society going forward. It's got all these big goals, but we see this as so impactful on how people live their lives. We need to think about some pretty drastic and unorthodox solutions, and proposed things like decriminalizing sex work through to initially allowing women to marry multiple men, but then making it mandatory in the future, which, as you can imagine, caused a bit of a public outcry. But it just goes to show that for someone who's a very pragmatic-minded professor who says, look, this is, it's not pleasant, but this might be something that needs to be done. So it's that last paragraph there just talks to, when you think about things like sex, relationships, love, dating habits, family values, happiness, all these things are pretty critical factors to understand if you're in any marketing role. And so it's important to keep these kind of things in mind. I even saw yesterday so Youth Digest, which is a major pop culture publication in China, released its top 10 words of the year, internet words of the year. And third place was a word playing on the cultural term guanggun, which is bare branches. And that's how you're referred to now if you have not produced. So me personally, I'm a bare branch, is what people would call me at the moment. And just goes to show that it's coming in the top 3 in 2020. It's obviously in people's minds, this new wave of people who really haven't had kids, aren't interested, because how can you find a partner and really settle down when there's these imbalances in societal issues? And a really interesting outcome is also things like female empowerment, how this is starting, in a traditional way where females have been not wanted compared to men, but yet are finding this independent streak. It's really growing. It's been a very interesting thing to see commercialized in China. International Women's Day is huge in China. It's dubbed Goddess Day or Queen's Day, and it's now one of the top 3 kind of biggest e-commerce events of the year as well, March 8th. On the left here, an example of this, Yao Chen, who's this is one of the biggest TV shows over the past couple of years in China. She's a consultant in this TV show, and it's thought of because of her and this movement. That's why last year more suits were bought by women than men in China. And conversely, when we look at those imbalances and also men not finding a partner, there's been a really interesting move in metrosexuality and homosexuality in China, which has got a whole bunch of interesting cultural ramifications. But it's probably also a reason why on Alibaba e-commerce platforms last year, men bought more platform shoes than women. So it's really interesting to see these things switch. And then on the right, just a little screenshot from one of the most popular TV shows this year, which is a classic kind of period Chinese drama, but they've flipped the gender roles. So here is a son getting chewed out by his mum for them having yet another son and bringing shame to their family. If only he had given birth to another girl. So I won't dwell on these, but that's just an idea of how to start thinking about segmenting these regions and what flow and effect it has to you as a marketer, as a building a brand. What kind of channels you're going to communicate to these consumers. So things like property size, pollution, everything. They have such wide-ranging impacts. We found things like pollution have affected our clients in laundry and household cleaning. Whereas it's really not a big concern for some consumers, whereas for some it's the top concern. Fitness, beauty and skincare, massive effect on the kind of ingredients and kind of products and whatnot that you need to be selling in certain regions in China compared to another. So again, just things to think about. Okay, so who are the consumers? Now, I've just grabbed this from a previous presentation. Slightly old data, as you can see, the 2018, and I wouldn't pay too much attention to the grayed out actual income levels. I just want you to focus on the age groups here, because this, again, is something which I think a lot of particularly foreign clients immediately, they don't register in terms of where is consumer spend coming from, where is income coming from, why, when I think in Shanghai, which is one of the leading cities, the median income is about 8,000 yuan a month. So that would be 1,700 Canadian dollars a month. And yet they go, but these consumers are spending so much more than what they're nominally earning on products. And it's because you have to start thinking about a few things. So in China, with this one-child policy, you have these family structures where you have 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and a child who is heavily, heavily doted on. And I really can't understate that. It's also still culturally relevant to be living at home with your parents and grandparents in these family units. There's a slight shift towards moving out and renting and independence, but it's still very, very common. A lot of my colleagues who are in their 20s all still live at home with their families. So they're not spending money on rent in that respect. Also, their grandparents, notably, particularly in the 60s, 70s, Cultural Revolution and everything, acquired a lot of property. And as you're probably well aware, property has become a hugely wealthy asset in China. And so there's these big multi-million-dollar property portfolios, which these very frugal by nature grandparents and increasingly less so parents have to hand, renting out a lot of rental income. And there's a lot of money that's being passed down to that youngest grandchild. And so, yes, they're already earning more than older counterparts for a few reasons. If you're born in the 90s, you're 7 times more likely to have a tertiary education than if you were born in the 80s. You've been part of these big urbanization schemes from the government, which would push you into cities, and there's a greater income in the cities compared to rural areas. And all of these factors combine to make for this younger consumer, this 18 to 45-year-old, particularly in that 30 to 40 bracket, as being really where the wealth and the consumption is often derived from. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind about, particularly when your consumer in other markets might be in their 40s, might be having a family. It's very much a younger, quite dynamic consumer. So that might shed a bit of light on what we're going to just cover in a few slides' time. When you've got to think, okay, I need to kind of up my game in terms of how I'm marketing, because this consumer is spending a lot more time online. They're consuming a lot more pop culture, a lot more information, and they're kind of eager to change. They're eager to learn new things, new products, new brands. And so you have to be on your toes a lot more than you would be kind of resting on your laurels with an older consumer in a more traditional market. So on that note, I just thought the slide would be quite interesting to just touch on. So celebrities, KOLs, and heroes. So KOLs, for those of you who aren't aware, if you ever do any reading about China, you will hear this term KOL, Key Opinion Leader, essentially meaning influencers, but it seems like it's a big term for just endemic to China. You will also see KOCs, so Key Opinion Consumers, and we'll get to talking about those, particularly in the channel section. So here's is obviously thousands and thousands of other faces that I could have put on this list here, but these are just some of the real big top names in China, just to give you kind of an idea of who are the people that represent these different generations. So if we look at someone like Taishu Kun, who's in the bottom middle, just above the post-90s writing, in that lovely blue velvet jacket, you could probably make a case for him being the the number one most popular person in China. So he's 22, 23. He's from Wuhan. Grew to fame as a judge on an idol show. Idol shows are still big business in China. There's one in seemingly every category. Everyone absolutely loves it. And he obviously is a musician himself. You will quite often find that these top KOLs or celebrities are singers, actors, hosts. They're really everything under the sun now. But just to give you an idea of, you might not have heard of Taishu Kun, but that is like a Beyonce on steroids. That's the thing I find really fascinating, is that you probably have not seen or heard of these people, but in terms of their following in China, it is immense. Hundreds of millions of kind of social followers. People, household names throughout the whole of China. And just to go to show how significant and how you have to start really thinking about your target market differently in China. The NBA, the National Basketball Association, last year, they chose Taishu Kun as their big spokesperson for the NBA in China. Now, I don't know about you, but I really could not think of a kind of person more or further away from a LeBron James than Taishu Kun. To celebrate his announcement, he put up, and I quite often refer to it, come back to it because it's quite entertaining. On his social media, he put up, wearing his little suspenders and doing a little dance with a basketball to some funky music. I can just imagine how much the people in the NBA would have been laughing when they saw that, but yet amused by him probably getting paid tens of millions of dollars to do so for the NBA. But it was a savvy move, because to coincide with that, they partnered up with Alibaba and had a content and merchandise section on Taobao, on Alibaba's one of their major e-commerce platforms, and they reached a whole bunch of new consumers. They had a huge amount come into the sport, start watching, look for kind of Taishu Kun's commentary or Taishu Kun, what he was wearing in terms of merchandise, and want to buy what he had. And it's just fascinating to see, for something like basketball, it's got a lot of macho in the West, to see, a man in his blue velvet jacket wearing makeup is, the face of it in China. And speaking of makeup, probably a good little transition to there. So just the man holding the lipstick there, you could also make a case that is the most powerful marketer in the world, maybe one of two. So his name is Austin Lee, and I talked before about live streaming. So live streaming e-commerce, in some perspective, my client works with Austin Lee, and they did a 1-minute segment on his live streaming show in the lead up to Singles Day, where just because consumers know that he can get the best discount in the market at any time, and that he recommends products which he's a fan of, they'll watch his show, and then when he has a product on, they'll buy. So my client sold $8 million of a skincare product in a 30-second spell, when he said, right, it's 30 seconds to get this special deal, buy. And just the orders poured through. And then he said, right, after 20 seconds, he said, okay, that's the allocation done, on to the next one. So the sway that they hold is absolutely fascinating. And I'll talk a lot more about that in the digital section. And then just to finish off on this, rethinking your target consumer, you see that animated figure there. That's Luo Tianyi, who things in China continue to absolutely bemuse me, even though I've been there so long. As a virtual KOL, she sells concerts where she'll be hologrammed onto stage and she'll be singing, and a developer will be in the back kind of programming her moves, but people will go and go to see her. She's also held more of these live streaming shows. She has a huge, millions and millions of followers on social media. And it's just fascinating to see. That's the kind of thing which your target market in China is interested in. And just to kind of follow on from that, I have to make a few sacrifices in my job as a China researcher. and sometimes that involves watching television shows, which I otherwise would have absolutely no interest in. And this is one of the hottest TV shows right now, so I felt like I had to watch a few episodes of it. It's called Dimension Nova. I would urge any of you to go watch it on YouTube. There is an episode on YouTube. And it's one of these idol shows, but all the idols are these virtual digital creations, kind of like that Luo Tianyi in the previous slide. And just to go show how significant it is, actually, if we look at the quite, well, the man seductively cooking in the kitchen and the woman who's there, that's Angela Baby, who's also one of the biggest names in China. She's a host on this show, and it shows them interacting with these digital idols and would-be contestants and commenting on their performance and their features and whatnot. It's truly bizarre, but this is the kind of headspace that you have to get into when you're thinking about China. This is what's popular. Things like this, you could have a target market which really wants to see you associated with Mayu, this virtual KOL who's currently, tracking well and getting lots of votes on an idol contestant show. Okay, so we've got a few slides left just in this section. I'll quickly go through this one, but this is really when I want to start talking about consumers craving information, and then why digital is so important, why so much time is spent there, and its meaningfulness to Chinese people. I love the stat on the left about internet penetration. I think it tells an incredible story about where China's been and how quickly it has come. To go from 9% internet penetration to nearly 2/3 in 15 years is a pretty dramatic rise. And it also shows there's a fair way to go in terms of, the amount of Chinese who are coming into the middle class, about the opportunities which are going to keep rising in these tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 cities. And this image on the right here is of, some of you may know, 2011 is the kind of like a hallmark event in Chinese social media. This was the high-speed train crash in Wenzhou. Now, this was a highly publicized development, this high-speed train, something the government was very precious over. And then when this crash happened, they were rushing to try and sweep it under the rug. There was some evidence that they were sending teams out there to try and bury the train and then block people from taking photos and talking about it online. And at the time, social media was really just starting. And Weibo, which we'll start talking about in a second, was the major social media platform at the time. And it's kind of good to think about Weibo as like Twitter in a sense. It's a bit different, but easiest comparison is that it's like Twitter. And China found that they couldn't censor all the people that were talking about it on Weibo. Suddenly, a huge amount of people were signing up because they heard about this big buzz and everyone was talking about this thing. People were resharing, taking photos, everything. And it led to this, probably like one of the only times that there's been such anti-government sentiment for a country like China. Polls were being hosted where people were saying, 99.5% of people were very dissatisfied with the government's treatment of this event. And it really kickstarted social media, where people suddenly felt like, oh, I have a voice. I'm one of 1.4 billion people. Pretty hard for me to stand out in my day-to-day. But yeah, I can create this identity online. I can be this voice. I can be heard. I can interact. I can have a lot of control over what I am online. And so it was very interesting to see that kick off. And as you can imagine, all of those factors really led through to today in terms of how social media has taken a hold on Chinese people. And I thought that last stat there was just to reflect on the immense numbers of mobile usage in China. So another thing, if you're having to choose between making your brand website desktop focused or mobile optimized, you're always going to go mobile. Everything happens through your phone in China. People really don't use laptops or desktops to the same extent as they will their mobile phones. Yeah, just very quickly, on the consumers craving information, even though I will start talking about how domestic brands in China are really going from strength to strength. They're taking a lot of market share of foreign brands at the moment, and more your competition is with domestic brands as quality perceptions grow. There still is these things to understand about how consumers have grown up and what's happened in the past few decades. So many of your target market consumers have had endless scandals, food safety struggles that they've been incredibly aware of and had a huge impact on their purchasing behavior. On the left here is the great melamine scandal of 2008, where babies died and thousands were sick. And that really irreparably hurt the domestic infant formula market. It's only just now where the government has felt bold enough that they can make some goals to try and get, I think the goal is to have within 3 to 5 years, 60% of the infant formula market in China to be domestic supply, which is crazy to think of from where domestic infant formula was just a few years ago. Because people, the wounds are still raw. Consumers, if you ever talk to particularly Chinese mums, but just Chinese consumers in general, they are professional consumers. They know everything about their product, everything about their brand. They do a huge amount of research. And so you just really have to be catering to that and have that knowledge that you're having to really get over the line with them. To get over the line with them, you're having to have a really strong foundation of information about your product and brand so people can feel secure in it. On the right here, just is 2017 when there was a big vaccine scandal, interestingly enough, with what might be going ahead soon, where the second largest vaccine producer in China was found out that it was shipping expired vaccines around the country, causing like a mass exodus of Chinese and bringing their kids to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong ran out of a variety of different vaccines within a couple of weeks because of this big, negative effect on this domestic vaccine supply. And that's why we're starting to see, particularly in the digital world, really pretty out there developments in things like traceability. And I'll be talking a bit more about that in the channel section. But this is an over-top example where a chicken producer in China now has QR codes that you can scan on their packs, which brings up the following. You can see like a live stream of where your chicken was raised, this exact chicken. You can see, what its slaughter date was. This is all blockchain integrated. They even put Fitbits on their chickens, so you can see how many steps it took in its life. So there you can see, 2.1 million steps this poor chicken took in its life before it met its end. This is an example just to get you guys again thinking the right way about China. This kind of technology is out there. 2020 has been a really fascinating year for things like blockchain and traceability. China has been pushing it massively. They see it as an area where, because of their kind of statewide control, they can really push China to be like a world leader in this space. I mentioned the likes of infant formula before. They've gone into that category and they've set up essentially a dedicated platform just for all domestic infant formula suppliers, where there's blockchain traceability for every one of their brands. And now all foreign competitors are going to have to find their own resource to come up with, a comparable system for themselves. And it's just, if they start doing that in other categories, and then suddenly there's already sense that, Chinese quality is improving from a consumer, suddenly more and more foreign brands will be losing that competitive edge and kind of assumed quality. Okay, right, good timing. So I think for the next 10 minutes or so, we will just focus in on this brand Canada. I mentioned it in the opening. So this is, I think for reasons you'll quickly find out, we won't spend too long in here. But overall, we ran a survey, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So I'll just quickly cover off this. The Canadian brand in China is quite weak, really, just to not beat around the bush, particularly compared to other countries of origin. And I think on the right here, if I draw your attention to this, this was just a stat we found when reading through some McKinsey stuff last year, where they held a survey in the particularly luxury category and with luxury consumers. So again, these are more affluent consumers, more educated, where you'd expect their knowledge to be higher than other brackets of consumers. And 55% of respondents did not think Canada Goose was Canadian. So yeah, just to repeat that, they saw Canada Goose and they were like, oh, don't know, could be anything. And it might sound bizarre given it's in the name, particularly it's actually in the Chinese name as well, Jiandayu, which literally means Canada Goose. But when you're seeing, we've worked with the likes of, say, IKEA, and they have a real big struggle because they've been in the market for quite some time. They've kind of become quite normal. They haven't really done a lot of marketing and advertising around being Scandinavian, being Swedish. And I think Canada Goose is similar, where they don't really, their marketing isn't pulling back and being like really pushing the Canada angle. Consumers start to kind of forget. So IKEA has this big, when we started working with them in 2017, needed to address a brand position issue where people started thinking they were almost Chinese, or it was a kind of a Chinese company that spun out of the Scandinavian countries. So it's quite fascinating to see this. And I think this just goes to show that when we look at countries like, say, New Zealand or Australia, who have really strong inherent brand positions, if you're a company or a brand from those markets, when you enter the market, you carry a lot of inherent value with a consumer. And that makes their job a little bit easier than what currently a Canadian brand has to do. Because if you're a Canadian brand, you will come into the market and people will associate things like, oh, that's really safe destination. We know that mostly through it being a top education, international education market. That's one of the biggest associations that Chinese consumers have with Canada. But it really struggles to have that unique component. So I mentioned that survey. So we're just about to, through the rest of the presentation today, we'll reference a few things. But there was lots of additional value that this brought out in that, again, that lengthy, detailed training module that we provided, which you'll be able to dig through at some point. But yeah, 800 respondents across Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And again, if you look at that age bracket, we focused in on that, the kind of age bracket of consumers, which I've been talking about, where consumption is. And this was all with frequent consumers of imported goods. And just on this slide and the next slide, just to quickly touch on the geopolitical stuff. It's good to be aware that state media in China has a huge influence on the kind of information and kind of content that the average Chinese consumer or Chinese person consumes. And so, yes, any kind of negative political sentiment around the world is streamlined into a consumer's news feed or social media feed. And so here it's not that surprising that 39% of our respondents said that yes, the current political climate between Canada and China has affected their willingness to purchase. Now remember, this was in January 2020, and I will say that has definitely diminished. Also earlier this year, we asked across all of these different countries of origin down the bottom where purchase intent sat based on the current political situation. As you can see there, Canada comes very close to the bottom. Obviously, nothing really compares to the US. But again, this was earlier than in the year. And look, there is no shortage of, if you look at this, there's no shortage of countries which a Chinese consumer holds a grudge against at the moment. They are incredibly patriotic, incredibly nationalistic, and particularly on a thing like a survey, which is kind of outwardly chosen, they will often promote those kind of nationalistic tendencies. But yet, as we can see from last week, despite many different surveys saying, all right, we're going to boycott US goods this Singles Day, the US was the best performing country of origin. They sold over $5 billion US dollars worth of product on the day. It was a big growth from last year, and they did incredibly well. And so, yes, you do have to kind of weigh these things where, yes, this will have an impact on how you do market. You just have to be careful and tiptoe around a few things. I know kind of cancel culture is a big thing in the West for a variety of different areas, but in China, it's purely along the lines of, can you be seen to be being negative about, or being, offending the sensitivities, is the term, offending the sensitivities of the Chinese people. And brands have obviously lost out a huge amount for that. I feel like every luxury brand by this point has had some issue, because they're the ones who are often having to take edgier marketing standpoints and have really struggled to hit in that respect. So long story short here, just you do have to be a bit careful about what you're saying. Our partner agencies who kind of execute social media accounts are constantly, for like the sports teams that they're a part of, that they're managing in China, they're constantly trawling Twitter feeds of their players in these teams, these football teams and whatnot, to make sure that there's no potential anti-China sentiment that can be perceived, because they know that's just going to result in a huge amount of pain. And so it's really interesting. You do have to be on your tiptoes, but it's not the end of the world at the moment, particularly as Australia is taking a lot of the spotlight away from Canada at the moment. The last couple of days, China's foreign minister has just been, listing out, right, these are the 14 grievances that Australia has caused on China this year, and that this is what they need to reverse if they want to have a discussion about lifting all of these tariffs and this boycotting of products that's going on. Yes, so I could definitely say Australia is the worst at the moment. Right, I'll just quickly skip past this. We've already talked about the sentiment around China being the top destination. But again, talking about what to leverage, this is the lowest hanging fruit, is Canada's education landscape, is that it's incredibly popular, it's perceived incredibly highly. And it's good to keep in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit more later about particularly Taobao as a channel and the Daigou channel, which is traveling Chinese or Chinese student engaging that community within Canada. They're often involved in these Daigou schemes of purchasing products and sending them back to China, and it can be a really valuable brand building tool, particularly for SMEs who are looking for low cost initiatives. So I'll talk about that later. But yeah, I thought the slide was really representative. Just quickly went into Baidu, so China's kind of Google, China's big search engine, but it's not as advanced as Google. And just popping in New Zealand and popping in Canada. And as you can see there, I think it's actually a really representative way of how national brands are kind of perceived. So, when you talk to a consumer and you talk about New Zealand, suddenly it's purity, beautiful landscapes, really, pure resources and quality that's coming from these, unadulterated source. Whereas in Canada, you don't have that real positive list of attributes which product brings to the table. Here, it's just a flag. It's very much just the brand, and no substance beneath it. And I think that is something which, we are seeing a lot of other countries invest a lot, particularly Australia and US at the moment, whatnot, investing a lot in their national brand in China, because it's such a valuable investment, because it trickles down to all of your exporters. It suddenly makes their job way easier when there's suddenly some real positive associations and interest and excitement about products from the market, regardless of what category they're in or what the brand itself actually is. And just to really hammer that home, on the right, when we were structuring the survey, I really wanted to just have a question in there which to really clearly communicate this, and why we would love to see kind of a Canadian national brand campaign in China that really makes a big difference. So I asked this question: if all your products had to be sourced from only one country of origin, how would you feel? As you can see down at the bottom, Canada definitely comes last in those markets. You can see there's a lot of people who are pretty neutral about it. We also work with the UK government, which just started, and that's a similar area that we've communicated to them, is that they have a few cool, interesting, unique attributes, but similarly, it's consumers in China don't get super excited about the UK, but similarly as well, it's really top class education destination. But I think as well, if you look at what comes out top, China, if you had to only source all your products from one country of origin, people would want it to come from China. And it's pretty fascinating. We're starting to see this more and more, the sentiment change and move. Obviously, there's a lot of patriotism, a lot of nationalism in that sense. But we're starting to see things like recently working in a beef project. We're asking, right, if you had a 100 yuan, so $20 steak from China and a $20 steak from Australia, what would you prefer? And then respondents will go, oh, well, I'd want the Chinese steak because it's probably fresh. It's probably, from nearby, so I can get it really quickly. It's probably a high quality cut than what I could get out of Australia, which would be freighted in, it'd be a worse cut of meat and whatnot. And so when you're starting to see that, all right, quality associations are getting high enough that they're starting to discount, like, oh, well, it will be a better quality product just because of, they feel there's an assumed quality already in the Chinese product, that they're starting to make that kind of claim. That does show you where that mindset's shifting and re-emphasizes what I was starting to talk about earlier about how important it is to build a special brand, because it is getting harder to separate yourself just on the virtue of being a foreign product. And then just out of interest on the left here, when purchasing foreign brands, which categories do you most prefer to purchase? That gives you a kind of idea, and it's quite in line with what we see in a lot of the work that we do. Beauty, skincare, dairy, really, really clear top categories for where foreign products still win. And then as you can see coming down. Okay, last slide in this section. Guys might be interested in this. In terms of products highly associated with Canada, on the left, there was a huge list of products, and then each one went into. In our training module deck, for each of those products highly associated with Canada, we did an e-commerce crawl. So we used our tool, which goes into each of these e-commerce platforms, which I'm about to show you shortly. Goes in, grabs sales data, grabs brand data, grabs origin data, and shows where sales are being generated, what kind of products are winning, what kind of product features are winning. So yeah, if you are interested, you can go into that and see, particularly in those categories, if there's anything of interest to you, you can have a deeper look. And then on the right, just asking about, all right, well, what brands stand out as Canadian to you? So a quarter of respondents, just over a quarter of respondents, see the Canada Goose. And then you can kind of see they're loosely arranged by how the size of respondent mentions. You can kind of see what else came through. And again, I will say, if we were doing this for other countries, you would probably see several pages full of brands. All right, here we go. I think nice timing. We're about the halfway point, and we're going to get into the digital landscape finally. So in the survey, we asked the respondents to essentially say, what are your top digital channels for foreign product awareness? And this worked out quite nicely, I must say. It really did show what are those core channels which are important for a foreign brand starting out in China. Again, we're having to keep this quite category agnostic. This is for broadly speaking. We will touch on, niche channels, which will come in below that 10%. I'll touch on a few of those because it's important to know that essentially for every category in China, there will be some niche platform with maybe 3 million followers, 3 million users, sorry, which is really specific to your category. Recently we were working with a children's toy brand, and what do you know, there's a children's toy and children's homeware channel with a very small group of users, particularly compared to your 500-600 million Alibaba users. But it's a lot lower investment for getting involved in that platform. It's got a group of consumers who are very aligned to your product. They're all very passionate, enthusiastic about the category, and so your kind of your investment on advertising, your investment on setting up a presence there is going to have a lot more ROI than it would in these other channels. However, eventually being able to be on these big Alibaba platforms is incredible for your brand awareness, as we're going to start talking about very shortly. So that list is how we're going to work through. So first off, we're going to jump into these sales channels. Oh, actually, no, we're not. Sorry. First the slides just talking a bit. Yeah, I'd say this is like a tip of the iceberg slide, just to give you an idea of kind of how things are grouped, really the vast connected nature of China's digital landscape. This could be hundreds of different platforms. The average Chinese internet user has between 60 to 65 apps on their phone. There is, just to speak to those niche platforms, you will find that these consumers, we often have a really fun exercise in our consumer research where we'll ask our respondents to, particularly if they're on iPhone, which is easier, there's a setting where you can go into your battery usage, and then it shows you the different apps that have contributed to your battery usage. And we'll get them to screenshot that and send it through to us. And then we can kind of see how much time they're allocating to each of their apps. And it's a huge list. So it's really interesting to see all the different ways they end up online. But I just wanted to talk, because you'll see this coming through as we go through these channels, this idea of omni-media. So on the left, there's a few platforms noted there. That more and more, these platforms in China are becoming kind of everything. So they're around their particular area of focus, but you can have an e-commerce presence, you can have a forum, you can have an instant messaging service, you can have live streaming. It's really quite these ecosystems that a lot of these tech companies are wanting to build into their own platforms. And why I mention this is because more and more, when I'm advising, particularly smaller businesses, on where their investment should go, if they truly understand some of these platforms, it's becoming less and less necessary to think about having a huge array of platforms, because you can kind of do it all in one. And if you're able to streamline and make efficient your investment, particularly in the likes of a WeChat, which has everything, as we're about to talk to, I mean, you essentially have your own bank balance as well within WeChat. I rarely miss it, not being able to use it every day in New Zealand at the moment. It's an incredible app. I could jump on and invest in the Chinese stock exchange or the Hong Kong stock exchange through WeChat if I wanted to, within a few clicks. You can literally do everything. It's truly awesome. So I'll get into these sales channels now. So first up, I just wanted to bring up what I was saying earlier about how much consumers crave information. Now, you all know what an Amazon listing looks like, but I just thought I'd just jump into Amazon, type in like a standard, pretty boring product like a Mr. Muscle, but cleaning it. What's this one? Cleaning a shower. And this is what it looks like on Amazon. This is the kind of information that you get. Oops. And now I would like to share what that looks like on a Chinese e-commerce platform. So again, keep in mind that this would all be mobile as well. It's different on desktop, but it gives you an idea of what these platforms look like. So this is Tmall, which I'll get to talk into in a second, the largest kind of B2C domestic platform. And here, you land on this page. There'll be a video that plays often when you land. There's a number of different images with different features and whatnot here. Here you can see, right, this is sold over 100,000 units of the SKU in the past month through this e-commerce listing. Obviously, they had a good Singles Day. 130,000 reviews there. Some various advertising from the platform. And then you get down to the listing proper. And I had a look at this earlier. This is by no means an extensive listing, but yet, here we are. They're playing a family. They're playing a piano together. And then you get into things like, product features. What are the ingredients? What does it do? Scientific certifications. You'll often get influencers who will come in here and they'll promote the product. Again, just endless bits and pieces. Yeah, what does it work well with? Often here is where, when I talk about that traceability component, you often find, particularly in food products, there'll be like a whole story. You'll jump into a thing about a carton of milk in here, and it will tell you exactly which farm and which cow it came from in many cases. It's truly, this kind of goes on and on. And then you get down to, the reviews. Chinese consumers love reviewing things. This is something as well to keep in mind, is that particularly for like consumer engagement, you will often want to be on these platforms tracking these things, and particularly on your socials, engaging with consumers who are commenting on your accounts and on your products. It is essentially a part of Chinese culture to review e-commerce purchases. I have been absolutely scolded by my colleagues on a couple of occasions when I've purchased something and it didn't quite work right. I didn't go on there and post photos and post a scathing review to warn my fellow netizens. Very much professional consumers, they almost say it's their duty to call these things out. And the level of detail, we study all of these kind of reviews all the time. The level of detail that comes through in these, you have to be really on your toes. It's not uncommon to see something like, it's a health supplement product, and then a consumer will purchase it from this domestic channel, and they'll say, yes, it kind of it feels legit, but keep in mind there was this tiny 1 centimeter sticker on the product when I purchased it a year ago in Australia, and it's not on this product here from this e-commerce platform. So that's a bit fishy, but just keep your eye out for that. The level of knowledge and the level of pessimism and cynicism when it comes to products just goes to show where their level is at in terms of the boxes you need to tick, and getting the amount of your kind of information right. So that's just a quick look at an e-commerce platform. It is, again, a real shame that I'm not able to take you through these things in person. But I would urge, particularly something like WeChat, it would be great if you did at some point manage to actually download it, and then maybe someone in the team who has a bit of Chinese know-how would be able to show you. Okay, so sales channels. Now, e-commerce is, as Jade mentioned in the opening gambit, growing rapidly. It's the talk of the town when people talk about China. And yes, it's still not as big as offline retail by any means, but it is growing, and it is capturing more and more of the kind of premium segments or the more expensive goods. One thing I want to state is that in your home markets or in North America, you'll be aware that brand.com is where a lot of e-commerce is generated. But in China, over 90% of purchases happen through e-commerce platforms. So like an Amazon, where brands and products are all aggregated on the likes of a Tmall or a JD.com or a Pinduoduo, Suning, or a VIP.com. These are the biggest platforms in domestic e-commerce. But something to keep in mind, as I've kind of just touched on, but there is an element of a brand.com within these platforms. It's far more sophisticated than Amazon. So say a Mr. Muscle or Canada Goose or whatnot, they will have their owned branded page within Tmall. So it's called a flagship store. They're kind of a pretty aspirational thing for a brand to be able to set up as a flagship store in Tmall or JD. They are expensive to set up. There's this kind of bit of a play that goes back and forth with Alibaba, because technically you need to be invited to be able to set up a flagship store on Tmall. But essentially you just have to come to them with a really well thought out strategy to show that this is how we're going to generate revenue through your platform if you invite us on. Because Tmall has this guise of wanting to be exclusive and only have the best of the best on their platform, but yet there's over 31,000 international brands participating on it. So it's good to keep in mind that that's how this works. There's e-commerce platforms is really where a lot of these sales are generated. The other thing to really understand at the outset is the difference between domestic e-commerce platforms and cross-border e-commerce platforms. So as you'll see on the bottom left here, we talk about Tmall and JD take up 86% of all e-commerce sales, but that also includes cross-border e-commerce sales as well. So this is a page dedicated to cross-border e-commerce market share. And as you'll see there, number 2, Tmall Global and JD.com come in second and third there, as that contributes to that overall 86%. Now, cross-border e-commerce is often a really valuable first step for a foreign brand because and this is very much dependent on your product and the category that you're in. But when I say it's often a more attractive step is because it's a bit easier to get set up because you don't have to register your products for general trade in China, which depending on the category can be really tough. We look at a category like beauty or skincare, where if you want to register your products for general trade in China, you have to go through the whole process of testing on animals, where it's still mandatory to test on animals if you want to sell your products in general trade. So we know, it's really common for a lot of beauty brands who have ethical concerns over that and don't want to compromise their cruelty-free status. They will sell just through cross-border platforms. Similarly, a lot of products struggle to get all their ingredients over the line. There's a lot of slightly strange but black and white things in China. We have a tea brand that we work with, who their classic bergamot tea has a couple of ingredients which for some reason are seen as stimulants in China. And so one of the ingredients in their bergamot tea is banned, so they can only sell their bergamot tea through their cross-border platform. So that's why you're going to see more of these brands have a cross-border platform and a domestic e-commerce platform, because it really changes depending on what they can register. The registration process can be years long, it can cost an absolute fortune, and the reward isn't there. Now, this is also because increasingly the line between what on earth a cross-border e-commerce platform is and a domestic e-commerce platform is blurred. And I think just really want to hammer this home because it is kind of important to understand. Let's go back to our e-commerce pages. So here we'll just use Tmall as an example. So we'll jump on Tmall. So this is the landing page for the domestic e-commerce, the biggest domestic e-commerce platform in China for B2C, Tmall. So you land here, this is the domestic, and here you have Tmall Chaoshi, which is Tmall Supermarket in the green, this little tab here, and that takes you to essentially Tmall's own store of quite often like daily goods, because it's things which Tmall has consignment over, and they will be able to be shipped to any consumer within the same day. So you're going to see a lot of like grocery products and the likes of that Mr. Muscle product was on Tmall Supermarket. And then here in the purple, you have Tmall Gorji, which is Tmall Global. And as you can see, it's pretty, you're often, it's not exactly a big difference. You can open this Tmall Global. Everything looks the same. It's just got a slightly purple color scheme. Quite often, increasingly listings, the products stocked in Hong Kong are often in special zones in China. And so it's kind of the same shipping time. The line is really blurring between what cross-border actually means. We do a lot of studies in this, and increasingly, we found recently for a client survey that half of all respondents didn't actually know what the difference between cross-border and domestic e-commerce platforms was. And so that's just something to keep in mind, that these things are blurring as consumers are getting more needy, more convenient based. They're wanting products now. They don't want to have to wait the 3 weeks of shipping time, which these cross-border platforms did have only a few years ago. So back to the Prezzo. Okay, So moving through, yeah, we talked about Tmall, giving you a look. Yeah, just to be clear, so it's the biggest B2C platform in the world. It's really where a lot of consumers will now start their product journey, particularly for a category which they know well. They'll go into Tmall to see if there's and see what's at the top of the algorithm, what people are purchasing, what's popular. Next, Taobao. So again, this is under the Alibaba umbrella. So Alibaba own Tmall and Taobao. Taobao is the biggest, oldest kind of cornerstone platform in China. It's C2C, so consumer to consumer. It is open on average 7 times daily by its active users. And this is, and part of this is because Taobao aggregates all of the Tmall and all of the Tmall global listings. So people will go into Taobao, they'll search something, and they'll see everything from these Alibaba platforms. Taobao is also fiercely innovative, lots of little gimmicks. They're constantly doing things. Recently, they created like a village where you can essentially have an avatar which tries on different products. It's got AR, so you might like a pair of shoes, from like Farfetch was one I was looking at the other day, a fashion site on Taobao where you can use the function to put the shoes on your own feet and see what they look like in real life. All of these different things. And this is where, when I mentioned those Daigo who might be in Canada, those people who purchase on behalf of their friends and family in China, they will often have a storefront in Taobao. So Taobao is really this fast and loose and dynamic place, which is quite hard to really own your brand, but it is a phenomenal tool if you're able to leverage it in terms of getting these kind of Daigo or getting your advocates to be speaking about you and sharing your things in China. Just time-wise, I'll just quickly flick through this. I just wanted to mention that this is obviously talking about digital and branding, but more and more we're seeing this trend of leveraging offline. Famously, Jack Ma, who founded Alibaba, when he was asked recently, Jack, e-commerce now makes up 25% of total retail in China. Are you looking to grow that? How much are you looking to grow that figure? And he said, I'm not interested in growing that 25%. I'm interested in digitizing the 75%. And true to his word, since the kind of 1.5, 2 years ago, he said that this has really been the big push from these big internet companies. So they've been starting offline supermarkets. They've been starting, acquiring the likes of Gourmet. These Pinduoduo acquired this recently, or heavily invested in an electrical appliance store. All these initiatives where now you kind of walk into these stores, particularly the one on the left here, Hema, which is the one with a little hippo icon. You walk into these stores with your app out and your phone out, because you're going to walk in there, you're going to be able to scan product codes, and it's going to be able to tell you traceability information. It's going to be able to tell you, brand stories. It's going to have, in some of the fruit sections, there's mirrors which have digitized numbers of these particular set of oranges were grown under this temperature. Ridiculous levels of information, which is a little bit gimmicky at the moment, and consumers definitely do say as much. They're not necessarily impressed by all of this, but obviously it just gives you an idea of where this is going. More and more in these offline stores, if you have a distributor on the ground and you've been pretty hands-off about how your brand's presented offline in China, but you have a really keen understanding of how it's presented online because you can see it more easily, you kind of got to be aware that increasingly you're going to have almost like a dedicated O2O person who is aware of, all right, how is it actually being perceived? Because the consumer might look at your product and go, there's no further information, there's no engagement, there's no experience in store for this product. But yet I go next door and then I can see that I'm able to have that scan experience and play a game and potentially win something, and all these different things which are coming to light. Okay, JD, so I won't spend too long here. So this was the one which had 20% of the domestic e-commerce market. It's similar in a sense to Tmall. It's just very much kind of on the rivalry side with Alibaba. So Tmall, so JD has a partnership with WeChat, with over 1.1 billion monthly users, which I'll be talking about very shortly. WeChat, really exists at the heart of China, and for me. And through this partnership, it means that JD has the advantage of connecting with WeChat. So you can post a link to your friend to a JD listing, and then you can receive that link and you can click through, and then you can make a purchase right then and there. Whereas with Alibaba links, you would click on that in WeChat and then it would get a 404. That's kind of how petty the rivalry is in this respect. And so there's lots of different features where, you might be, if you're talking to a client or customer who, it looks like a WeChat based strategy is really something for them. Maybe it's that JD would be more appropriate to be that first e-commerce channel, because they might be looking at that kind of private traffic seeding strategy through WeChat, where they've spent a lot of their marketing investment to set themselves up. So it makes sense that they want to convert purchases through JD.com. That's an example. And there's a few different categories which JD, notoriously has a bit of a stronger sentiment towards, things like electronics and whatnot. But it's similar in a sense to Tmall. It's just a massive e-commerce platform. Pinduoduo, interesting to watch this one. I think it's also just good to be aware of. It won't be relevant immediately for a lot of Canadian exporters. It's an incredible story how it burst onto the scene just a few years ago, and in a very competitive space, obviously dominated by the likes of Alibaba and JD. It's very much targeted, as you can see from the bottom right graph. It started out in like the tier 3, tier 4 cities, targeting lower end consumers with bulk buying, kind of crowdfunding purchases, really cheap purchases of goods. So like a classic example would be, all right, there's a listing here for tissues, and if 5,000 people collectively say they'll buy it, they can have it for 1 yuan each, 20 cents each. So that would be a classic example. So you go in and you kind of like share it around with your friends and your network, and you say, there's only 40 more people needed. Come get on board with this. It's running out tonight, and you'll come together and you'll get these cheap prices. So Pinduoduo for a long time had that lower end association. They've been working really hard. We have a good relationship with them because we know one of their key goals is to be a premium platform that goes up against the likes of Alibaba as well. So they've done a few campaigns, like they've worked with Apple. They must have paid Apple a fair amount of cash to do a launch on their platform, of a new iPhone with an attractive product price. As you can see there in the background of that screenshot, there's some Apple AirPods, which there shows 31,000 products of that had already been, people have been grouped together to purchase. So it's a really interesting one to watch, but it definitely wouldn't be my first recommendation when you guys are talking to potential exporters. Okay, we've got a good timing, just a few minutes, and then we'll reach that onto the social stuff. But live streaming, I've already touched upon how absolutely absurd it is. I just want to repeat that statistic that came out yesterday on Alibaba platforms for the Singles Day period over the past couple of weeks. 1,660 years worth of live streaming. Absolutely crazy. And it's really got to the point where if you aren't live streaming, you are struggling to keep up in a sense, because that's what consumers want. It makes sense in a lot of ways. And I guess the easiest way to describe this is like a classic QVC channel, but exciting, is really a good way to describe this live streaming phenomenon. And it's done in a variety of different ways. I mentioned that guy, do you remember him, holding the lipstick, Austin Lee, who I said maybe is the most powerful marketer in the world. You get ones like him whose big name, like he's a huge celebrity now in China. He had 160 million viewers tuning into his live streaming throughout that Singles Day period. He's very sales focused. So he's one where, and that's not all of them. He's one where, if you're a brand, you've built your brand equity for some time, you've done great marketing work, everyone's aware of who you are, so that when you come on his segment, and he's promoting you, people are already willing to purchase, but it's just that they know he's got a great price in the market. So he's a perfect person to convert a whole bunch of purchases. But I've seen, and I know from behind the scenes, I know brands that have, big brands who haven't really done much in market, gone, oh yeah, well we've got a segment, we've paid the big appearance fee to these guys, to have our product on there and do a 5-minute segment where he's going to sell a whole bunch. But yet people didn't come there knowing the brand and product. They weren't, already aware of the kind of quality and features and everything. So that was the first time they were hearing about it. And so they didn't take part in the big purchase rush that he normally gets for clients. And so that's kind of a good lesson about why there's also the side of live streaming, which is very much brand building. So a client of ours, on that flagship store on Tmall, they have attached to that a member of staff who they pay just to be 9 to 5 every day. It's a seafood company where she's just making up recipes and cooking all of their products. And it's just great. People will quite often just go, oh, really interested to get some ideas on some recipes, or understand kind of how this product's used. Like, it's all frozen product from overseas. I'm not really used to cooking frozen seafood because I've got these associations with fresh being better. And so it's great because there's just this constant live streaming booth where you can go in and you can go, oh, I'm interested in that product. Jump in, see what she's cooking. And then you can message her and she'll have a chat with you. And it's just a lovely way of kind of fostering that consumer engagement. So I can jump through here, but yeah, what's the appeal? Again, similar to that Dimension Nova virtual idol show, I would strongly recommend trying to track down, search Austin Lee or search Via, VIYA, and try and get a video. I mean, it's pretty incredible to see just the big rush and the big excitement that these guys are able to generate. They're real shows people. I mentioned before there's these big appearance fees to get these top-end live streamers on. They also make hefty commission. I know for a couple of our clients it often offers around 20 to 25% of a purchase price. So it's needless to say Via, VIYA, so it's one of those top 2 live streamers, when she was asked recently, how much, what is your salary? She said less than 10 billion yuan. Which is, pretty ridiculous. So that's why I say these guys are serious marketers. And again, pretty critical people, just to, even if you can't speak Chinese, just to watch a little bit, just to kind of understand what this market is like. And again, get back to that thinking the right way about China. Okay. Now we're going to get into, so just to kind of recap. Right, so getting back to the survey, so we've gone through these e-commerce channels, and now we've just got just under half an hour, which is good time to go through the social stuff. And that's where we're going to go from that brand official website down to Douyin or TikTok at the very bottom, and talking about these different channels. So just to refresh you, as you can see there, broadly speaking, category agnostic, imported consumers were saying we want to see a brand official website. Then down to things like, a brand official WeChat or Weibo account, to WeChat Moments, Little Red Book, Weibo in general, general WeChat accounts, Baidu, the search engine, and then Douyin or TikTok. So with that in mind, let us work down that list. So when we talk about Baidu, it's more talking about the brand official website. So if you're a new brand in the market, or if you're in a slightly quirky category or something that's not really a cornerstone category in China, Baidu will be where consumers head to. Baidu is, yeah, I think I said it earlier, think of it like a Google in China. But yeah, it's kind of a weird one in that it's one of the only internet giants which really hasn't done great work in innovation in their platform. So it's exactly as it was some time ago. They've done a couple of various advertising things, but it's not an exciting platform to be on, whereas the others are. And so it has lost a bit of traction in that sense. But here, what's important is that when we talked about consumers being really cautious and really wanting to know where their brands come from, what the product is, one thing they really, really want to know with a foreign brand is, is it actually a foreign brand? Is it actually selling in its home market? Is it legit? Because there's no shortage of fake foreign brands that Chinese companies have erected and selling, pretending that it's actually foreign for some assumed quality associations. And so here's Baidu's what's great is to just make sure that you have your website up and running, if possible, have at least the core elements of the website translated into Chinese, and then having it, spending a little bit of money on some SEO on Baidu to make sure that, when searching for your brand, that they're able to easily navigate to the website, because immediately that's like a first tick on your credibility journey. Given the value and the amount of time spent on the likes of WeChat and these e-commerce platforms, your website won't be significant after this. People might refer to it every now and then, but very much they're going to go to the website and they're going to go, oh, okay, good. That gives me some sense of assurity. But I can see that they've got these social channels in China which are much more friendly, much more engaging for me. So I'm going to spend my time there. But it's very valuable as that first step to really breed that first tick of trust for a consumer. So when we talk about Baidu, it's also really talking about the brand website. Now, I'm going to spend a fair chunk of time, as you can imagine, talking about the almighty WeChat. Keeping in mind when I talked about Baidu not innovating, WeChat is exactly on the opposite end of the spectrum. And the reason why it's been innovating and has continued to innovate is because its owner, Tencent, has actually had a bit of a struggle the past 2 to 3 years. Most of their revenue actually comes from mobile game production. So even though they own this huge social platform which dominates China, it's not actually a big revenue earner. And that's partly because its advertising is pretty crap on WeChat. Whereas right now, you jump on Facebook, and for me, it's near unusable by the amount of ads and whatnot that pop up. WeChat's founder has always had a statement that WeChat will always be about user experience. And so using WeChat, you literally feel like there might be in your kind of in your moments feed, which is akin to a Facebook feed where you're scrolling through things that your friends have posted. There might be an ad. I think you see maybe 2 a day. And given, people are spending quite often 4 to 6 hours a day in WeChat, that's kind of like the middle. That's not a lot of advertising. There'll be minor ads that will pop up within a kind of an article. But yes, just good to keep in mind that advertising's not strong in WeChat. It's a closed platform. It's something where you're going to have to get followers from other sources, things like offline events, things like that website where you have your kind of WeChat code very clearly published on the website. So please go and follow us there for more information. Having your QR code on a product, things like that are going to be very important to try and generate those followers. But once you're in WeChat, once you have a follower on WeChat, it's great. So working through that list on the left to see where it's most important for foreign brands setting up in China. So first and foremost, official brand accounts. So this is like your own mini, your personal brand webpage within WeChat. There's a few different types. It's super easy to set up. It's a nominal cost. I think it's like $99 to register an official WeChat account, and maybe takes 2 hours of your time if you've got your kind of brand, your business license, your Canadian business license to hand. That change happened about 1.5 years ago, where previously before that you needed a Chinese business license. But now there's no barrier. You can do it with a Canadian business license and set up your WeChat account. Then the next thing is, so on that you can do things like, post content. You can interact with followers. You can set up a menu bar, welcome messages, all these different little functions, and push content to those followers. Secondly, you've got their WeChat groups for private traffic. One of the really unsung, powerful marketing channels is WeChat groups. So essentially just group chats. But because in China there's a cap of 500 people for any of these group chats, and part of that's from a kind of a government management standpoint, where they're, similarly, if you're arranging a function of any more than 500 people outside, you have to register that with government authorities, because they're worried about mass amounts of people talking about something untoward. And similar, there are strict rules when you manage one of these WeChat group chats, that you have to be very careful about the topics that are talked about in these groups. But because of that, only having a cap of 500, it means that people are very involved in these group chats. It's not just like these meaningless, like 10,000 people, and you kind of struggle to have real people who have names and recognition within them. And so often there's incredible value in sitting in these and seeding your brand, your product, having kind of a spokesperson within one of these groups. We see it all the time, particularly with groups of like mothers, who might have 300 or 400, where we'll have, contracted one of these people in these groups to seed your kind of account or whatnot, and say, oh, I've got put onto this product, I tried it, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly you'll see these hits running through, and you'll see purchases almost immediately. It's quite incredible, the power that this private traffic does have, and that power of recommendation. Next, mini programs for anything. So a mini program is essentially like an app. I think the next slide actually is it. So it's an app hosted inside of WeChat. And that's something which is growing now. That's hundreds and hundreds of millions of active daily users of these mini programs. Chinese people absolutely love it because, as I talked about them having 60 to 65 of these apps on their phone, they don't have a lot of space left. So to be able to have kind of these mini programs, which are all hosted within the Tencent cloud, means that they don't have to download anything, but they still get the usability of one. They're really great for anything from a WeChat store. So you can set up your own like logistics within there. Essentially like it's his very own e-commerce platform. Right now, it isn't a big, consumers don't necessarily always want to be purchasing within a WeChat store. It's not as well established yet, but it is growing. It definitely is growing. It also does things like campaigns. You can host, with the usability of these mini programs, you can have things like loyalty programs, which are quite dynamic. There's lots of different applications. Essentially, just imagine everything you can do with an app, but posted kind of in your WeChat ecosystem. So really cool stuff done there. O2O initiatives, yeah, again, I talked about it being a closed ecosystem, so it's important to find ways to onboard people. But it's a really useful tool because you can customize a sign-up code for your account. You can customize a sign-up code for your account, and then when people scan in, they can get a targeted welcome message, you can get targeted content, targeted discount codes, promotions, and whatnot. And then a few things which I've already talked about. Okay, we're just gonna move through this just for the sake of time. So we've got about 12, 15 minutes left. All right, so Weibo. I talked about it being kind of the king of social back in the day when that Wenzhou train crash happened. It's still significant, but definitely a rung below WeChat. Best to think of Weibo kind of like a Twitter. I held back from saying WeChat's like a Facebook because it's so much more than that. And I think now we're starting to see the likes of Facebook aspire to be like WeChat and trying to include things like currencies and digital payments and whatnot. Yeah, so Weibo, I would say for a lot of businesses, it's not as relevant because to do Weibo well, you have to invest a lot of time. It's very fast moving. It's not uncommon that like a really good Weibo account will be posting, 5 or 6 times a day. It's often a really good platform to maybe just have a base presence on, and then you collaborate with influencers because there's a lot of influencers, particularly travel influencers or influencers based overseas who are on Weibo. And so it's something which, as a brand, if you're doing a campaign, you can collaborate so that at least there's some click through that people kind of see this post on this person they follow, and then they'll be able to be directed to your Weibo brand page. But then that will say, okay, actually, here's our e-commerce page or our WeChat or our, because consumers are aware that that's where a lot of foreign brands are putting their emphasis, so they're fine with that kind of journey. To reiterate, consumer journeys are not small in China. They can be quite intense. Little Red Book is a great one to know about. It's often very well suited, and I think it's a cool platform and how it's kind of taken a different direction from where a lot have headed in China. So Little Red Book is, as you can see on the top left, they're very female user strong. It started out, its ethos as a platform was that it was actually a platform for discussion for those who are about to travel overseas about what they should be buying, what hot tips there were for when they were overseas, and what they could be bringing back. And so naturally, it's got quite a strong alignment with the idea of a foreign brand and where it should be marketing. The thing which I really like about it is that there was worry that it was going to become kind of similar to all these other platforms where there's a real strong brand-owned, brand-controlled emphasis. Because at the moment, it's very much like review-based. You don't go on there to go and look at a brand page. You go on there to see what your friends and what these trusted influencers, these key opinion consumers are buying, what they're using, what they're spending, what they're talking about. And that's how you navigate to like an e-commerce page. So it does have e-commerce within it, but you go to the e-commerce after clicking through a person's review of a product. So it's really user-generated content initiated, which makes it a bit more unique and a bit more interesting. So, we again reiterate, there's so much more information on all these platforms, lots of case studies in the lengthy document. But here on the bottom left, it's just a quick few snapshots from like L'Oreal, for example, who spend a huge amount of money getting themselves set up with a brand presence on the platform. And they realized very quickly that they weren't getting any uptick. It's just not what people wanted out of the platform. And so they completely revisited it and they went, all right, we're going to go with an influencer-led approach. We're going to go with a key opinion consumer-led approach and not actually have this kind of, clean, clear-cut brand presence. And now doing much better. Probably don't need to talk too much to Douyin or TikTok, as you will no doubt be more well aware. But I would say, again, good to keep in mind on these platforms is that they are much more innovative. Even if you look at TikTok versus Douyin, the Chinese comparison, Douyin's aspirations are much higher. So right now, Douyin's had an e-commerce capability for quite some time now. It's linked, particularly it also links into Taobao. But it's now got these aspirations to set up its own e-commerce component. So they've stated they want 200 million of GMV, I think by the end of this year, that they want to go through their e-commerce component. And when there's so much user time spent on this platform, it's hard to see how they won't get that. When I was talking before about Tencent being a bit useless for advertising, the WeChat platform for advertising, ByteDance and Douyin is the opposite, because it's pretty crazy. We'll state there in the bottom left. So ByteDance has now overtaken Tencent in advertising revenue, which is quite dramatic. when you think about the users that Tencent has, you think about all that mobile gaming and the advertising that happens there as well. For pretty much, Baidu does a lot of platforms, and solely, Douyin is obviously, just goes to show the amount of time that consumers are spending on this platform. Obviously only 3% of Douyin accounts is actually branded activity. So it just goes to show the, how people are continuing to spend time on this platform, and it's generating a huge amount of advertising revenue. And so soon that transition to e-commerce could be a really big opportunity for kind of nimble brands who want to, beat other competitors who won't have recognized that as something to get on very quickly. Okay, so I probably should have gone to this page earlier, shouldn't I? That just talks about, that kind of on the bottom left, the process there. So on these videos, there's quite often like a shopping cart, and you can click onto that, click through, and then you're able to buy now. And you're already signed in through your Taobao account. Your details are all saved. It's very, very easy to buy things in China. Very easy to spend money with all these mobile payments. And then just finally wanted to really quickly just touch on these category specific channels. I mentioned before when I said something around, I think, children's toys, but it's good to keep in mind that if you are particularly small, you don't have endless budgets, and you need to make sure that your spend is as efficient as possible. Doing your due diligence on insights and getting a strategy set up. I know I'm very biased given that's what we provide, but it really does reap the rewards, because in China there's such a vast array of these platforms and channels. You do need to fight to understand where you have the most click through to consumers and least competition, really. And so these are just a few random bubbles, but I mean, you look at, this isn't even a niche channel anymore. I just chuck this in because I quite enjoy it from a cultural perspective. So Xinyang, or So Young, is the leading plastic surgery channel in China. Tens of millions of users, and processes, I think now is best part of 100,000 plastic surgery transactions a month. It's got reviews. It's got matchmaking system where it puts surgeons with customers who are looking for particular needs, online consultancies, supporting products. They've done some really cool things where this year they put these little booths that you see on the right, dotted them around shopping malls in China, where you can go in, you can get a skin test, and then it prints out, a list of products that they list of products and services that your skin type needs, that you can then go and convert a purchase to the platform. They were saying nearly 30% of the those who took the skin test then went on to purchase some of the products and services that were provided to them. So that's another indication of that O2O really coming to life. I can talk forever about the cultural significance of plastic surgery in China. It is quite fascinating. And then just another couple. So this is like a big fitness platform. But, as you can see, 24 million active users, 16 million active users. It goes down from here. And these are all potentially significant platforms. And again, we touch on a lot more of these in this lengthy document. They've all got different age profiles, different user profiles, different gender balance, everything. And so it's definitely worthwhile getting into that. Right, this is working out quite nicely. We just have a couple minutes. So I'm just going to quickly come back to those first 3 points. Be realistic. Just start thinking the right way about China. It won't make money in your first 2 years. China doesn't want your products, and without large budgets, brand awareness does take time. In this section, there was just a few things about kind of broadly things to consider. To be honest, it's not worth too much me spending time on them right now, but there is quite a lengthy section which really goes into things like, are you operating illegally? Do you have a good contract? Have you registered your brand name? Have you created a relevant Chinese brand name? We develop brand names all the time. It's a love-hate relationship because so many good names are taken. There's a lot of squatting on them. It's a first-to-file system in China. So if you are even remotely interested in the market, you need to get in now. It is something that we've had real painful experiences with brands who have already been essentially adopted a name by their consumers, their loyal consumers in China, but yet they can't trademark it. And so they have to fight for it because the person squatting won't sell for an extraordinary amount of money. Then just to finish, yeah, so I would recommend to have a look at that last section in the training modules we sent over. It's like a market entry checklist. Just, even though it's not exact and it's not specific to your category, it's just general. It just at least gives you like, okay, this is the kind of things that someone like a China Skinny who works with hundreds of brands on their strategic endeavors in China is saying I should be thinking about. Market overview, a kind of a landscape. Where do you understand your opportunity is? What's special about your brand or product? Who is your consumer? Where are they? Are they in a specific city or region? The regulatory environment, marketing channels, sales channels, and then staying up to date. We have things like our newsletter. It's free, it comes out every week. We've got 15,000 subscribers. It's about new things happening in the marketing world in China and understanding how things change. We promote others, who do great things as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot that can be done. I mean, to really hammer home, I'm a China nerd, and I spend my life reading and understanding China, and yet I'm still learning new stuff every day. And I'm not just saying that. We are constantly talking to consumers and whatnot, and it's fascinating how things do change. And you do need to stay up to date if you want to be, competitive in the market. That was just the last slide just to talk about costs, but we won't worry about it now because we're out of time. But it's not significant. Now I have, I think I've finished there. I'm not sure if Jade's still awake or not. I will be very impressed if she is over there at 5 a.m. China time. How you doing, Jade?
I'm doing okay, actually. I'm still wide awake. Probably as soon as I hang up, it'll hit me. But I wanted to say thank you. I don't know if you saw, there was one question that did come in earlier on what is the best platform for health food products?
Yeah, great. I'm just seeing that now. I mean, health food products, I'd say there's a lot of, trust that needs to be associated with things like health food products. And so say the health food brands that we work with, they have a combined strategy where they are on the likes of Tmall and Tmall Global and JD International. And that's because, particularly for health food products, you have to be, if you want to register for those domestic platforms, it can be a really rigorous registration process. If you want to make certain claims about what your product can do, it can be an incredibly expensive endeavor. So you even see, like a big health supplement company like Blackmores or Swiss, for some of their SKUs, they will just sell them in those cross-border e-commerce platforms. But yet they'll be in that kind of Tmall Global JD range. But when I mentioned the Daigou system, those those Chinese who live abroad and then bring the product to market and sell to their friends and family, that's also a really, really significant channel and platform really for health food products because there's an inherent recommendation there. People feel safe that, okay, my son or my cousin or my friend, they are personally recommending this product to us, and are often able to get cheaper prices because they're purchasing through a home market as opposed to purchasing the marked up product on a cross-border platform. But yeah, just think trust. Where can I get lots of trust and safety when I'm thinking health foods? And so that's where you've kind of got to think about that mix of trusted platforms, cross-border, if you need it for those regulatory claims, and Daigou market.